The purpose of memory is to prepare us for the future. And so we might not always get the facts of the events correct, but if we can get the lesson that we learn from the story, the moral of the story, then that is a successful memory. Hey everyone, welcome back to my series on Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. I'm back in the States, I'm back in my room. I recorded my last two videos in Taiwan, where I was at for my winter break. So today we're talking about rule number 9. And rule number 9 goes, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. And so obviously this chapter is about listening, and listening well. And the chapter delves into a lot of really deep and kind of philosophical topics. So I'm just going to highlight about 2 or 3 of the points that really stood out to me from this chapter. And the first one is giving preference to listening over giving advice. And Peterson talks about how giving advice is not genuine listening, because typically when we give advice, really what we're trying to do is to shut down the conversation and get it over with as soon as possible. And there may be another ulterior motive to giving advice prematurely, and that might be to revel in the superiority of our own intelligence, right? When we give other people advice, it makes us feel good, and that's just pride. So Peterson, reminds us sometimes if we just shut up and listen, and other people are given the time to share their own thoughts and process their story, they actually come to quite productive and positive conclusions themselves without any of our help. And I think that's biblical too. I'm pretty sure somewhere in Proverbs it says something like, even a fool who knows how to hold his tongue is considered wise. Right? So if we learn to be quiet sometimes and let the other person come to their own productive conclusion, it looks smart on us. Now, another thing I want to highlight from this chapter was the importance of the act of summary. So what is the act of summary? It's when you are retelling a story from your life, you're actively summarizing it. And that act of summary is really important and helps us organize our brains. And I realized that I feel like there are different ways to engage in this act of summary. There's journaling, right? When we journal down the things that happened, or when we talk to somebody. And also when we pray, right? When we talk to God about the things that happen to us. These are all ways that we can engage in the act of summary. And why is summary so important? Because of this important fact that Peterson states, which is that, the purpose of memory is not necessarily what we think. It's not just to store, an accurate record of our past. We think of all these events like a catalog in our brains, and it's not really the purpose of memory. The purpose of memory is to prepare us for the future. And so we might not always get the facts of the events correct, but if we can get the lesson that we learn from the story, the moral of the story, then that is a successful memory. And so that is why the act of summary is so important, because sometimes we never get to the moral of the story unless we have processed through it appropriately. And I think of that when I'm journaling. A lot of the time it starts off kind of messy, and it takes a couple of pages until I finally realize, oh, so this is what happened, this is why it happened, and this is how I can avoid this in the future. And I also experience that when I talk to my trusted friends or with my mom, and especially whenever my mom asks me questions like, so what did you learn from that? And then that really makes me think like, okay, yeah, what did I learn from that? I guess I learned this and this and this and this, but it never would have occurred to me unless I had actively tried to summarize the experiences and get to, the punch, the gist, the reason why it all happened. And I love how Peterson says it takes a village to organize a mind. And I think we all need the input of community. We all need the input and conversation with friends and family to remain sane, to remain organized up here. And finally, I think a really important point that I learned from this chapter is this issue of pride. When it comes to listening to others, a lot of the times an obstacle that we have is pride, because we think that we already know everything, or we think that others don't have anything to say that would add value to our lives. And I know none of us are that extreme, but okay, I will confess myself. I definitely think when I was younger, I was a very prideful person, and I think I'm still prideful in a lot of ways, but I'm working on it. But when I was younger, I remember a lot of my mood and attitude was quite tense. I was very easily offended. And I think part of the reason for that was because I was raised in a very competitive culture. You know, before my parents became Christians, and after they did, they completely transformed, you know, over time. But, you know, before that, they were just the typical Asian parents. And if you know anything about Asian parents, is that Chinese culture is very competitive, and you're constantly comparing your kids to other kids. And I think as a young person, as a young kid, I felt that I always had to compare myself to other people, and that put a lot of pressure on my little heart. And I think it made me a kind of an angry person, and it gave me a lot of pride, because maybe in some areas I was better than others. And so it would get into my head that I needed to do everything myself and I didn't need anybody else. I think it's also because I sort of equated other people's words and opinions to my worth and value. It's like all that I was hinged on what other people thought of me. So I would become even more defensive if people had anything bad to say about me, because it hurt me deeply. I thought, oh, then I am not good enough. And I would directly equate their words to my value, which is super unhealthy, you know, because other people's opinions just fluctuate all the time. And so it took a lot of years to really get to a point now where I realize that my worth and my value is not hinged on what other people think of me or what they say about me. And also, I need to learn to value and listen to the constructive criticism of those that I love, who really want the best for me and care about me, you know, instead of getting all defensive and angry about it. And I honestly don't think I would have gotten to this point unless I had really started to go through life and experience a lot of failure and rejection for myself. You know, just take some beating to my pride and learn some humility. I think I had to go through a lot of these lessons to realize, oh, so I guess I don't know everything, and I should really value the advice of my elders, especially my parents. And so now, in regards to my relationship with my parents, they'll still give me some advice, and sometimes I'm very grateful for the things that they say, and other times I really have to learn to hold my tongue, you know? I have to bite back whenever I want to become defensive again. And like the title of this chapter, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. And definitely in regards to a lot of things, I think my parents know a lot about a lot of things that I don't, as well as potentially every other person on the planet. You know, I think there is always something we can learn from other people's stories. And so that's the beauty of listening, is when we genuinely listen, we then are able to sort of bypass the pain of having to learn that lesson for ourselves. You know, we get their lesson, we get their takeaway, which is amazing if you think about all the time and the energy and the pain and the suffering that you can potentially bypass if you really learned to listen to others well. So that's my summary. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that some of the things I shared in this video was helpful to you and inspired you to also listen and assume that the person you are listening to might know something that you don't. Anyways, hope you are staying warm this winter and take care of yourself. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on that notification bell. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!